It's just wonderful to have Lynne teaching with us. So this is the third of her sessions. So we're now on compassion, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the previous ones, and I'm sure people have that have attended those. So we're really looking forward to this session, and thank you, Lynne, for continuing.
Thank you. So yeah, so shall we ask people to mute again, just
yes,
as we start?
That's sensible, yes.
But actually, as I go through, if there are sort of questions or things that you want to say as I go along, then if you just kind of wave a hand or whatever, then I'm quite happy to kind of, you know, interact in that way. Anyway, yeah, it's really lovely to be here, and I can't tell you how much I've personally got out of looking at in greater depth at the 4 immeasurable thoughts. I knew I loved them. I didn't realize just how lovable they were. I think really they are extraordinary, yeah, extraordinary teaching. So I'm really very happy to share, you know, the little bit that I've learned. Yeah, so just very brief introduction. They are the 4 immeasurable thoughts. Actually, I'm sure probably you're all familiar with this, but anyway, they are aspirations or positive states of mind, which we are encouraged to cultivate within our mind stream to the extent that we naturally abide in them, so that, you know, they become, in computer talk, our default mode. So when we're not thinking about anything else, or even when we are thinking about other things, they are within this context of immeasurable love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And the teachings say that not only is it possible for us to dwell in these states, but also it is possible in terms of the immeasurable aspect of them. It's possible to develop them to such an extent that A, they are always included within our mind stream, and B, they extend to everyone. They exclude no one. And that's the challenge. And that's what these the practices that are taught are designed to help us to cultivate, to develop these minds, because, well, I don't know about you, but clearly I'm not there now, you know, and so, and, you know, it recognizes that probably most people aren't. So there are a series of practices suggested, which people have used over the millennia in order to develop the kindness, the compassion, the joy, and the equanimity that they already possess. So that's what we're about here. So as Jill said, today we're focusing on compassion, which in its immeasurable form is the heartfelt wish for all beings without exception to be free from all suffering without exception. And we've been looking at these immeasurable attitudes from the different perspectives, or perspectives of different traditions. And within the Lamrim tradition, taught by in the Tibetan tradition, the expectation is that we take responsibility to do this. We want to do whatever we can to help all beings become free from suffering. Okay, so that's just a very brief introduction. So we'll start by settling ourselves with a sort of settling motivation, meditation rather, and we'll include a motivation as we've done before. So if you'd like to sort of adopt a physical posture, a sitting posture that is supportive of meditation, you have your own, I'm sure by now. And it can be helpful to give 3 out breaths, sort of quite long out breaths. Well, breathe deeply 3 times, focusing on the out breath, just to kind of bring us into the here and now to start. And then focus your attention on your body to begin with. And the qualities, physical qualities we're looking for is to be stable. So we're well supported by the chair and by our feet on the ground or whatever, however we're sitting. That we are upright and alert, so our spine is straight. And within that framework, our bodies are relaxed. So spend a couple of minutes running through your body, becoming aware of where the different parts are, how they're feeling. Relaxing any areas of tension there may be. Maybe around the face, the eyes, eyebrows, jaw, the neck, shoulders, and the back itself, abdomen, hands or feet, legs. If there are any areas of tension, just as we breathe out, gently allow them to relax. In this relaxed position, try to make a connection with your own personal motivation for attending the class, and even more than that, for your connection with the Buddha's teachings, why they're important for you. And maybe why compassion is important for you. And gently let our focus rest on our breath. Bringing our awareness back whenever we realize we've been distracted by thoughts, memories, plans, physical sensations, whatever. Gently and kindly bring our awareness back to the simple action of breathing in and out. In fact, you're probably aware that developing a meditation practice like this, kindly focusing on the breath and breathing is possibly one of the most compassionate things we can do for ourselves. Developing an inner place of safety and calm and regeneration. So let's do that together for about 10 minutes before we focus on the actual contemplations today. So now we can maybe, still within the meditation, formalize that motivation with the traditional prayers. We can have those. I'll recite them. Join in with me if you wish. Otherwise, just stay with your own motivation. So we'll do the refuge and bodhicitta prayer 3 times. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And then we'll go through the verses of the 4 immeasurable thoughts quite slowly, each of them having a pause at the end of each one. And then the one on compassion, I'll guide us through a meditation on that as well. So how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were to abide in equanimity, free from hatred and attachment, not holding some close and others distant. May they abide in equanimity. I myself will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please, Gurus and Buddhas, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings had happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have happiness and its causes. I myself will cause them to have these. Please, Gurus and Buddhas, bless me to be able to do this. So now the compassion verse, we'll take it line by line. So how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were free from suffering and its causes, its cause. So within your own sort of experience, think of those either you know or you've witnessed on TV or in life who are experiencing any level of suffering at the moment. And allow yourself to think how wonderful it would be if they were free from that suffering. Imagine them being free if a miracle were to happen and their suffering ceased. And again, let's think about the cause of suffering, or the causes. The teachings say that all our suffering comes from the negative karma we've created in this or past lives. And that the karma is created due to disturbing states of mind, which are themselves suffering: anger, greed, jealousy. When our minds are overwhelmed by those states, then we are in states of suffering. And the same with others. And we're told also that those delusions, those negative, mistaken states of mind, come from a basic misunderstanding, a basic fundamental delusion that sees ourselves and all others, all life, as somehow being separate, solid, unchangeable. So how wonderful if ourselves and all sentient beings were free from that mistaken view that leads to those suffering states of mind that create causes of suffering for ourselves and others. Just sit with that thought for a moment. And again, as that thought takes hold in our mind, then naturally the next line arises. May they be free from suffering and its causes. And then the next line, I myself will cause them to be free from suffering and its cause. This is challenging, isn't it? And yet, if we just bear in mind, to the best of my ability, may I do this. So we need to be honest about what we're capable of. Try to stretch, to grow. That's the purpose of these practices. But we recognize where we are now. And we have compassion for ourselves. We don't squeeze ourselves. We do what we can, and we rejoice in what we've been able to do. And if we haven't been able to do anything, or it feels puny, then we renew our wish, our aspiration to be able to develop and do more. That in itself is a positive, compassionate action. To pray, to wish, to aspire to do more, to develop the necessary skills and mental qualities. And we look in the third line, please, Gurus and Buddhas, bless me to be able to do this. So we look for inspiration around the world from contemporary teachers of all faiths and none. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, great inspirations for me. Greta Thunberg, great inspiration. And we can look at the stories of the enlightened beings from the past as well. The Buddha himself, the effect that he's able to have all this time and distance away and relieving suffering. So hopefully at the end of that verse, we feel inspired to do whatever we can to the best of our abilities as they are now. And then we take to the last verse. Yeah. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were never separated from happiness of higher rebirth and liberation. May they never be separated from these. I myself will cause them never to be separated from these. Please, Gurus and Buddhas, bless me to be able to do this. So again, think if everybody were to become totally free of the causes of suffering and totally develop the causes of happiness, then they wouldn't exist. Suffering would no longer exist. Problems, difficulties. It's a worthwhile ambition to have, to work towards. Okay, thank you. Then relax the meditation. And right, I'll begin. And I really have tried to limit it and not talk too much this time. Let's see, because I know we've got a wealth of experience in the room, but I do find it irresistible sometimes. So anyway, let's get on with it. So compassion generally is regarded as the flip side to love, loving kindness, which we looked at last time. It's just a slightly different focus here. Before we were focusing on wishing people be happy, find happiness in its causes, as in the teaching, and now we're focusing on their suffering and may they be free of that. So, you know, it goes without saying, if they are suffering, then it's difficult to be happy, and if they are happy, then there's less likelihood that there will be suffering going on. So, you know, it's just a way of looking, really, of developing particular qualities in our own mind. And in the traditional presentation of these, the traditional meditations, we go through the same, it takes the same sort of pattern as we've had in the previous meditation, at least in loving kindness, where we begin to sort of develop the feeling or the aspiration within our mind of compassion for those we are close to, that we care about, including ourselves. So, you know, we start where it's easy. And also, you know, the advice in all traditions, I think, is to focus on someone we care about who we know is really suffering. So we get a real genuine sense of, wouldn't it be great if they were free from that suffering, and what can I do to help? And then gradually, to make it immeasurable, an immeasurable quality, then we extend. And we extend through various categories of people. But of course, then, you know, it's more of a continuum. You know, there are people that gradually we care about less. We don't know them, the so-called stranger. But even within each of those, it's a gradation, isn't it? There's no such thing as the stranger. But, you know, we try to extend compassion to those that we don't know when we're going about our daily life, kind of trying to think of them as a complete human being. And, you know, if we see somebody suffering, then if there's anything we can do to help, we naturally try to. And then there are those that we don't want to help, we find difficult. All along the way, we will meet barriers. If we're genuinely doing the practice and not saying the words, we will meet barriers, you know, of people that say we're just not so enthused by, or we actively don't want. In fact, we might actively rejoice in their suffering if they're the wrong political party or whatever. You know, it's or, you know, if they're being, you know, people that have harmed us, or we see doing harm in the world. You know, I do it myself. We can, you know, although, you know, it's not Buddhist, but you know, I secretly rejoice when things go wrong for them, which is not the point of things at all. And it basically doesn't help. So we examine each of those in turn, just like we did before. But we can also kind of come at it from different ways. And just, I know we've talked about the barriers before, but I came across in a teaching that I listened to by a really good teacher, Australian teacher called Glenn Svensson. You come across him, Wendy, at all? Yeah. He did a teaching on the 4 immeasurable thoughts, and he's going to lead the meditation, just to give you a break from my voice this afternoon. But anyway, he has this thing, which is apparently well known in psychology, called cognitive fusion, which it can be helpful to explain, I think. So, first of all, a quote from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's the emanation of compassion, so I'll be quoting from him a lot. He says, "True compassion is not just an emotional response, but a firm commitment founded on reason. Therefore, a truly compassionate attitude toward others doesn't change even if they behave negatively." And that's often where we struggle, isn't it? Certainly is where I struggle. So basically, what the teachings, and many other teachings, as a primary school teacher, I used to espouse this to others and to try and follow it myself, is that there is a person and there is the behaviour. In this case, negative behaviour. So there is a person and they are behaving negatively. And if we can see them as separate, then it's easy to respond. There is the person, they are deserving of compassion because of their confusion, their misunderstanding, they are behaving in this particular way. And we can at the same time say we can address the behavior which we find difficult. I mean, as a teacher, I would do this. I'm sure you did as well, Jill. What you're doing, say to a child, what you're doing is not acceptable, or that's not good. Not, you are a bad person, don't do that. I mean, it's a totally different thing, which is exactly what cognitive fusion does. It kind of mixes the person and the behavior together and says, this is that you are a bad person. And we do it as, well, I do it as an adult all the time. It actually, our perceptions seem to back that up. In fact, the way we see things, they seem like a bad person, but it's actually not very helpful at all. And it's really good to be able to recognize this and to be able to hold back and to talk to ourselves and to separate things out in our minds, because it leaves us in a position where we really can't do very much at all. It limits our choices. So if we don't like the person, which oftentimes we don't, because we've kind of conjoined them with this bad behavior. So our choices of how to act is to attack the person. Don't do this, you're a bad person, you shouldn't do this, and we badmouth them to our friends and everything else as well. If they're actually somebody we like and they're behaving badly, but we have this cognitive fusion, then we're stuck. We have to kind of accept the bad behavior somehow, because we can't address it. We maybe can make excuses for them, but it's really difficult. If a friend is behaving badly, if we have this habit of fusing things together, then instead of being able to say, whoa, what's going on here, that's not so helpful, we again, you kind of come across this, like, oh God, so that's what they really think, is it? So all along they've been fooling me, they really believe this, or they really behave like that. It's just very messy and the same, not helpful, and there aren't any other alternatives within that. Also, from that stage, if we're trying to have some kind of dialogue, there's nowhere to go. We're polarized. You're a bad person, I'm a good person, I can recognize this. And yet, from our own experience, we know when we've behaved badly ourselves in the past, we know that we're not a bad person, and those to whom who we may have harmed or hurt in the past would be appalled if they thought, well, Lynne's a bad person, she always has been, she was just hiding it before, and that's the way it is, so I'm not going to have anything more to do with her. We know that sometimes we mess up, sometimes we get out the wrong side of the bed, or circumstances prevail that just make us react or lash out or whatever, and that same understanding must be allowed towards other people, I think. So so if we can remember, if we can remember this, then we can recognize that our perceptions are not to be trusted, and we are able then to address sort of the behavior, or to understand, or to try and, even within our own minds, kind of understand, not to condone behavior. In fact, we are much more able to say, that's not acceptable, but still have compassion, or even loving kindness towards the person. And actually, there was in I think it's in Alan Wallace's book on the Boundless Heart, he says, if people struggle with this and don't want to do it, and I know that, but actually, supposing somebody had taken the adolescent Adolf Hitler under their wing, you know, and try to sort out and help him solve his problems along the way and his misunderstandings, wouldn't the world have been a different place? You know, you know, I think to me it is, if we can do it, recognize this, the only way forward. So I just wanted to kind of bring that in, particularly because it is a very helpful way of you know, to remind ourselves, avoid cognitive fusion, separate the person from their behavior, and then there is a way of going forward, at whatever level we're dealing. So that's kind of one of the barriers to developing compassion, which we can, you know, use our intellect, our understanding, our reasoning, that the Dalai Lama talks about, to help overcome. Another major barrier is suffering itself. You know, by definition, as such, suffering is that which we don't like, we don't want. So we don't necessarily want to be with it. And as a quote from Christina Feldman's book that I used last time, she says quite clearly, compassion asks us to take our seat at the center of the landscape of pain and distress. So we sit there. Pain and distress happens, our own or other people's. And compassion, if we're developing compassion, we are asked to sit there and to avoid all the, you know, our normal reactions, really, fairly habitual reactions, which may be denial. No, I'm fine, really, I'm fine. Or, you know, or just get over it, pull your socks up, get on with it. Denial of the pain and the suffering. Or dissociation. Okay, this happened, but I'm going to put it in a box and I'm going to keep it in a separate part, and I'm not going to have anything more to do with it. That's the past, and I'm moving on, onward and upward. Or we distract ourselves, and now I'm going to, you know, sit and watch a box set and get a tub of ice cream out the freezer and indulge in whatever we do to distract ourselves. I'm going to turn the news off now, I can't take anymore. And of course, you know, there are some times when it does get difficult. There's no denying that. And you know, at those times, you know, the alternative danger, I think, is, you know, that we get overwhelmed, and we can slide into depression or despair. And that's when things like compassion fatigue come up. You know, we can't do anymore. We turn off the TV. I don't want to know. I'm never going to watch the news again. I'm only going to watch box sets, Line of Duty. That's all. You know. So, and that, you know, that's understandable. But, you know, as Buddhists, if we call ourselves Buddhists, you know, what's the first noble truth? There is suffering. It exists. That's where it starts. And we're advised to understand suffering. That's the, you know, advice of the first noble truth in all its levels of manifestation. And from the Buddhist perspective, you know, the suffering of suffering, the manifest, the observable suffering, is only scratching the surface. We know that, you know, they talk about the suffering of change, which is that which we normally call pleasure, is actually just a, you know, a temporary relief from observable, you know, palpable suffering, and will itself, you know, eventually turn into problems and difficulties or suffering. The perfect meal, you know, if it went on all day, would cause suffering and problems, for example. And just, you know, born as we are with this physical body, you know, we are not, the minds that we have, prone to distraction and to those delusions. You know, we're not going to avoid suffering. Is there anyone who hasn't been touched by suffering at some point in their life, or isn't going to be? Even those, you know, however rich, successful, powerful, beautiful, whatever, you know, people have problems and difficulties. We all grow old, if we're lucky, and die. That's how it is. People we love grow old and die. So the first step, I think, is to spend time, and it's not easy, but to spend time recognizing this. That's the Buddha's teaching, and to see the bigger picture, to see that endlessly scrabbling outside of ourselves to try and gather together all the causes of happiness that we can, and building up sort of barriers and walls and security nets to try and keep out all kinds of suffering externally, is really not the point. You know, we're wasting our time actually, and our energy. The story from Shantideva, which is, do we try to cover the whole earth with leather, or do we just cover our feet with leather in order to avoid pain and suffering? So Buddhism suggests we cover our feet, or take the analogy, we work with our mind. We try to understand suffering, our own suffering within our own mind, and of course we try to relieve it where we can. We try to relieve our own suffering, and we try to relieve the suffering of others where we can. And if there's something we can do, we do it. We don't just say, oh well, that's it, that's the way it goes. Of course not. We have compassion. That's what compassion is. It is a natural inner response to suffering, our own and other people's. We want it to end, and we want to do what we can to help it to end. So actually, by developing compassion, we can find a way of being with suffering, and not just being with it, but finding a way of relieving it, actually, in ourselves and in others. So let's have a look let's have a look at what Buddhism says compassion is. And actually, part of our problems in sitting in the midst of problems, sitting with compassion, I think is linguistic. According to the Oxford English Dictionary and our general understanding of compassion, it's the dictionary says compassion is to participate in another's suffering. So when we see somebody else suffering, then we suffer too. And so that's not particularly attractive to willingly take on somebody else's suffering, or to share somebody else's suffering. And it is part of the normal human response. The neurology sort of has told us, neurologists tell us that there is this resonance within our brain function, that when we see somebody suffering, then a similar part in our brain kind of lights up and is activated, as if we were undergoing that suffering ourselves. And it's maybe helpful more to think of that, or to define that as empathy, an empathic response. But we don't necessarily want to stay there, because if we do, it's exhausting, and that's what leads us to overwhelm and to despair, can lead us to despair. So a Buddhist definition, and this was from Thubten Jinpa's book, A Fearless Heart, on looking particularly at compassion. He defines it as a sense of concern that arises when we are confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to see that suffering relieved. So within that, there's three aspects. So there's the sense of concern. Let's say when we're confronted with another's suffering. So we're confronted with another's suffering. We see it. We notice it. We observe it. We're mindful. We're aware. And also, actually, within our own suffering, we're aware of it. This is painful. This is difficult for me or for them. And we're concerned. We care. We don't want it. The empathic response arises. And the third aspect is feeling motivated to see that suffering relieved. That's the additional, in my understanding, the additional aspect. We feel motivated. We want to remove it, our own suffering or the suffering of others. How can I help? What can I do to remove this? And in a sense, I don't know, there's maybe an English word that best fits with this is altruism. Or certainly there's a sense where altruism, there's a sense of overlap with that, where this certainly in terms of thinking about other people's compassion in the face of other people's suffering, sort of the overcoming selfishness and the wish to help others. And altruism we understand and we recognize within daily life. In fact, I just started reading a book by Mathieu Ricard, the French monk, called On Altruism. It's quite a thick tome with loads of footnotes in it, but actually it's a really, really good read, and it really is an incredible dissection of altruism and where it is in society and where it's not in society and how it's developed and things. It's really, really inspiring book, and actually quite an easy read for such a thick book with so many footnotes. I can really recommend it. Got a lot from that. Anyway, so altruism there. So as His Holiness said earlier, it's not just an emotional response, but a firm commitment founded on reason. So it's a mental attitude, and we can use, as we sort of looked at with the the cognitive fusion, we can use our reasoning, our understanding, our brains to try and to help us develop it. It's not just an emotion. There is an emotional element to it, but it's not. If we stay just with the emotion, the empathic side of things, then that, I think, is, as I think I said, where we're likely to get drowned in overwhelm. It seems to me. So it arises naturally. Buddhism says it's a natural part of who we are. It's part of our Buddha nature. The good qualities such as compassion, love, generosity. These things are basic to what it means to be a human being. They're just clouded over. That's the Buddhist view of things. And if we can remove those obstructions, in fact, there's, we can work to remove the obstructions to that, and we can also to allow them to develop, or we can cultivate them, like with growing in a garden, growing flowers in a garden. But those seeds are there and are a basic part of being human, being alive, actually being a sentient being, but particularly being a human, which is not the same as many of the cultural, the common cultural understandings of what it means to be human. This notion of, scratch a civilized person or scratch a compassionate person, and underneath you find a hypocrite. Is one of the quotes actually that comes from Mathieu Ricard's books, and I've certainly heard that before. Or people say, we've got this thin veneer of civilization on us, on the surface, but actually once things start getting tough, then you'll see, the savage beast, the animal in us. We are part of the animal kingdom, but this view says that the animal part of us takes over, and that's the real us. Well, that's what I mean, it's interesting to think, well, what do I believe? Because oftentimes we kind of imbibe these kind of cultural assumptions without giving them any thought at all. And, they, or at least a part of them, kind of gets lodged in our mind, and we might work on that basis. So it's worth actually giving some thought to it. But if you're struggling with that, say, that's what Mathieu Ricard's book is all about, actually. It's a complete, in my view, demolition of that current idea of we are selfish underneath, and he gives all the reasons why we are by nature, kind and compassionate. And actually, just in the very, very obvious sense of things, one is the Dalai Lama often quotes, we know when when our minds are filled with kindness, compassion, generosity, love, and all of those qualities, then we are happy, we are peaceful, we are contented. When our minds are full of anger and greed and judgment and all the rest of it, then we're agitated, which is the natural state from that. But anyway, so that goes on. So, and I said before, briefly, it may lead to action. It may be that, what we want to do, we want to save the world, but we can't. So we do what we can and we aspire to do more. And we be content with what we can do. is helpful, rather than thinking about what we can't do. And it's an attitude that can be consciously developed. So there are these sophisticated trainings and tools that we have that have been used, as I say, throughout the millennia, different meditations, different reasonings, different practices, different visualizations, all kinds of things that can actively develop our skills. Just like if we're trying to develop musical skills or athletic skills, or indeed if we're trying to develop hatred, if we're going over and over and over something, repeating how bad somebody is, then hey, why be surprised when hatred kind of naturally comes up in our mind? So we can choose what we develop. It takes courage to commit, to make that commitment, I think, to developing compassion and to actually stretching the compassion that we have already, to growing it. But it gives compassion, it gives courage as well. And I've got another quote from the Dalai Lama, which is very inspiring. He said, "A mind dedicated to compassion is like an overflowing reservoir. It's a constant source of energy, determination, and goodness. You could compare compassion to a seed. If you cultivate it, it makes an abundance of other qualities blossom, such as forgiveness, tolerance, inner strength, and confidence, allowing us to conquer fear and anxiety." And it is crucial to he also has quotes on this, it's crucial to the continued existence of life on our planet. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. Without them, we can't survive, these qualities. Just very briefly, what it isn't, we've talked before about the near enemies, things that look like these qualities but are not, are different. So it's not sentimentality or pity. It's not, oh, poor you, poor person who's suffering. I've got it all together. I hope you do too one day. That kind of looking down on somebody. Compassion very much is looking face to face with people, recognizing that actually we are all in this together. I might be all right at the moment, but who knows what's likely to come. And it's not overwhelm or despair or depression, as I've said, which themselves can lead to righteous anger, fear, or grief. It's not any of those. If we go down those roads, then we know to kind of check back, to backpedal a bit and check, hang on, what's going on here? Because they are not helpful attitudes to have. They lead to passivity and to indifference, I think, or just more anger and more outrage. So I think that's it, really. That's it. So some time for discussion after, if we have a short break, maybe just a 10-minute break, is that all right? And then we can come back with a discussion. But if we can put the discussion questions up now, just suggestions of discussion. I mean, it might be that you have your own questions, which is fine. But here are some questions that I thought it might be helpful to think about. And then we'll have a break. And if people want to just chat among themselves, that's fine. It's quite nice for community. And then we'll come back at, say, 5:10, and we have discussion and then a meditation. So there are the questions. How do we avoid overwhelm? What is your view of human nature? Is there anybody who doesn't deserve compassion? And is it even possible to remove suffering? And what is the role of political action or activism? We won't go through all of those, but they might be helpful. Okay, so is that all right? So should we leave and then come back at 10:00 and or chat? Okay, so
are we back?
Yeah, that's good. So maybe just have, it's kind of hard having I hadn't thought of this, having the questions up there and not being able to see everybody. So let's just have a little look, spend a minute or two looking through the questions and see if there's any that take your fancy, and then if we can take them down and then we can see each other. And anything's up for grabs. We've got sort of, I think I allowed for discussion until about 5:30 or just after. Then we've got this 20-minute meditation. and then kind of round up. So plenty of time really to talk, I hope, and to share our experiences and understanding.
Good questions. I've just scribbled them down, and doing that's made me really think about the questions.
Yeah. That's what I've been struggling with along the way.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Is it even possible to remove suffering? And scribbling that one down, I suddenly thought, well, if the Buddha said all life is suffering, is it possible to remove suffering? Yeah. But that's that's interesting, isn't it? Because if that's what we're striving to do as Buddhists, to cease suffering by following the Buddhist path teachings, but all life is suffering.
But what did he ask?
We get to the stage of enlightenment then, haven't we? So is it that only through enlightenment suffering can be, or there won't be any suffering if we're enlightened beings?
Yeah, let's get rid of the questions, can we, and then see what other people think, see what others with. But yeah, no, it is worth exploring, isn't it? What does anyone else think? Do unmute yourselves and pitch in. Is it possible to remove suffering? Speak.
Well, not that I'm an expert or anything by any means, but I mean, if we do follow the Buddhist path, so to speak, or any path for that matter that we choose to do, there is always that potential that we can free ourselves from suffering. And if we can do it, then everybody can do it. I mean, we're all human. So there is a possibility, but we have to, for it to succeed for ourselves, we do have to become enlightened, and to help others become enlightened in that process, and that's the only way, and that is eons and eons of hard work, but I mean, my rather than just giving up on that sort, though, I just think, well, yeah, okay, eons, it's not for me, it's an impossible task. Then I just think, well, you can become overwhelmed or indifferent and just move away from it. So for me, to get around that way of thinking, I just think, well, I'll just go and do my little bit every day, just try to be a better person as much as I can without beating myself up. I am where I am, and sort of working at it, but it's slowly. I think that's how I can carry on, is looking at it that way. Otherwise, it becomes too big a task. Just my thoughts on it.
You've all muted yourselves.
I did that because if we're all unmuted, the sound is not. We get feedback. Okay. So if we stay muted, and then if someone wants to speak, unmute yourselves. You can do that.
Okay.
My little strategy to save there. Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah.
So what does anyone any other responses? Thank you, Sandra, for yours. Any other responses to the question or that suggestion? Is it possible? How might it work? Well, that was what I was thinking about.
Yeah, it struck me there, Lynne, actually, as we were going on, that it depends on whether the question is, can we get rid of all suffering for all beings in the world, in human existence, or do we mean, can we cease our own suffering? And I know we're about, the compassion is about wanting others to have their suffering ceased. But isn't that about becoming bodhisattva, so that are we all supposed to aim to cease our own suffering, but then resist enlightenment so that we can carry on and support others? So it's whether we're looking at the big picture of the whole world, or whether we're just looking at, as Sandra was saying, you know, about herself and our own suffering.
It can, yeah. What does anyone else think? Wendy, you were going to talk. I don't have the answers.
Well,
yeah, Wendy.
But it seems to me that we have to start with ourselves, don't we? Because that's something that we have some control over. And if we believe, if we're sort of following Buddhism and believe in the sort of eightfold path and things, then if we don't believe that there can be a relief from suffering, what are we doing? I mean, why are we bothering at all? I mean, surely that's the core. And I think it's just getting it into perspective. And for instance, not getting overwhelmed by it. It means having some compassion towards ourselves, looking after ourselves. And I feel we can only do what we can in a small way. I mean, looking at some of the other questions, I think the political aspect, again, we can be involved, but if it gets to a point where we become violent as a result, I don't think that achieves the aim for me. And having had a career in nursing, I mean, the main aim there was to relieve suffering of others. And it's not straightforward, because sometimes you have to sort of cause someone a bit of suffering to have a longer term relief from suffering, if that makes sense. And there are people who have said to me, oh, I couldn't do that. I couldn't hurt people. You know, I couldn't give them an injection because that would hurt them. Well, I mean, if I don't have a problem giving an injection, if I know that that's going to relieve pain. So it's sort of one bit of suffering for the relief of a larger bit of suffering, perhaps. So I don't think it's straightforward. And I think that we can get overwhelmed if we're not careful, and have to guard against that, really, and look after ourselves a bit. And that's probably enough from me.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's helpful. Anyone else want to pitch into that? I mean, I think from listening and my own, been thinking about it for the last 3 weeks or so, but certainly there's, as Wendy said, it is the core of Buddhist teaching, isn't it, that to end suffering, and as you were saying, Jill, and the Buddhist teaching says that it is possible to end suffering. Suffering is part of life, it's part of unenlightened life. And so therefore, when we become enlightened, it is possible to overcome suffering. And for me, I see people like His Holiness, and I watch him on video and TV, and I read his books and hear stories that people tell about him, about their, when they've met him and things like that. And I think, well, there isn't so much suffering there, maybe. He does respond compassionately when people Tibetan people come, over first arrive in India if they've escaped from Tibet, and they tell him their stories. He cries with them. His compassion comes, but then he sounds a bit hard-hearted actually. But then and when he's with them, he is giving them wholeheartedly his compassion. He's listening to them of himself. And then when they go and the next person comes in, he gives himself of himself to that person totally. And he doesn't kind of linger with, apparently, this is my understanding, with the suffering of that previous person. He also suffered from, at one point, he had to cancel a whole load of teachings because he suffered from, I think, gallbladder things. So there was pain there. But when he talked about that, he talks about as he was being taken to hospital, and there was pain, I think is what he was saying, not I was in pain. So it's a different attitude to it. There was pain. But also he was looking out of the window and noticed some, and it was in India, and noticed, a beggar at the side of the road, and was able to think, how fortunate I am. That person, I'm being taken to hospital. That person doesn't have people to help him and stuff. So it kind of gives me when I see people like that, gives me confidence that that it is possible to overcome it, and to relieve it to such an extent that it's not a major problem, in a sense, relieves in suffering. But I mean, if I want to think about can it be removed, then I have to go back to the teachings on what are the causes of suffering, and it comes back to through karma, through the delusions, and then to this total misapprehension. So logically, I mean, not experientially by any means, but logically, then I can see that it must be possible to end suffering. That if there is no sense of separation, and that you just act from compassion all the time to help. I think for us, like Sandra is saying, we do what we can with what we've got, with the conditions, and we're happy with that, and we're working to relieve suffering and our own, which is a good place to start. And by working, in a sense, it's not such a dichotomy, it seems to me. It's not we understand our own suffering and how we can reduce our own suffering, to be in a better place, mentally, to be able to help and to have more skills to be able to help others. And at the same time, while helping others, in our clumsy, sometimes not very helpful way, we learn more about suffering and about how we also need to develop. So it's kind of, there's a dynamic there, I think, isn't there, as well? So that's kind of my understanding. But yeah, it is complicated for sure. And it's there is this long-term goal which can just seem so massively far away, and then there are the people in front of us, and there are the situations we're in. And Geshe Namdak, actually, the new resident teacher in London, he talks a lot about planting seeds. And so for me, I find that also really inspiring, because I do tend to get sort of, I look at the news or read the papers, and I do get overwhelmed, or I do tend to get angry or whatever, which is not helpful, you're right. But what he says is, every time we choose compassion, or we choose to hold back from anger or something, we are planting seeds, which, karmically, the teachings tell us must bear fruit. We are planting seeds of karma. So just to have faith, to keep planting those old seeds, and know that the fruit will come in its own time. What do you reckon?
I know the challenge, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but it's remembering that it's our state of mind that's causing us the suffering. So you were giving me sort of an example of, you're having a pain, which I've had this afternoon, and it's my state of mind about the pain, isn't it, that's causing me the suffering. If I didn't mind having a headache, I wouldn't be suffering. So although there's a physical pain and it hurts, but it's my state of mind about that. I don't want that pain. I don't want to feel like this. That's what's causing me my suffering, isn't it? And if I was fine about having a pain, and I'm thinking, well, I'm lucky, it's only a headache. Some people are living with this all the time. Mine's going to go away, hopefully, and I'm not going to have this pain anymore. And if I can just keep telling myself that, and it's okay, Jill, it's fine, it'll go soon. Don't worry about it. Just get on and carry on and be grateful for the bits that aren't hurting. I would be in a much better. I would be suffering less. So it's about it's our state of mind towards whatever it is that's causing us the suffering, not the thing itself. Is that right?
I don't know if it's right, but certainly we
Sorry,
can...
I know. It's Buddhism, isn't it? For discussion.
Again, what do other people think? Certainly we can add to suffering, or we can reduce it, can't we? The pain is there and we don't want it, and that's quite reasonable. And if we can do something about it by drinking water or taking a tablet, then hey, let's do that. But at the same time, and if they're different pains, if there's abuse or if people are out there causing harm and we can do something about it, then we do it. That's the wish to act, to do what we can. But yeah, we can certainly make the suffering a whole lot worse, can't we? By oh, poor me, this is so terrible, or how terrible you shouldn't be doing that, or or even, I don't know, maybe other people have done this as well. Sometimes, if I've been feeling unwell, then I can almost beat myself up with the fact that you've only got this, other people have got much worse. We certainly can, kind of create, we can be very skilled in creating more suffering for ourselves. But actually, yeah, just, there is pain. There's pain in my head. Can I do something about it? Yes or no? Then if yes, do it, like Shanti Davis says. And if not, well, just get on with it. Kind of, just accept, not get on with it. That's kind of almost the denial, isn't it? But or dissociation, but the acceptance. This is what is at the moment. And even within difficult times, again, when I was teaching, we used to sometimes, if there were families or kids had problems, we'd do this solution, introduce them to this solution focused therapy. I don't know if you've come across that. But what I really liked about it was that it focused on, say it's a pain or it's a difficulty. Okay, there probably are times when it's not quite as bad, or there are probably times when actually it's not there at all, it doesn't work. Can you tell me about those? And I think that that's another strategy that we can bring, and certainly mindfulness is about that, isn't it? It's actually, if we do have a pain or a difficulty or a chronic pain or something like that, if we sit with it, we'll notice it isn't always constant. It isn't always constantly the same. It varies, and that kind of inquisitiveness or inquiry can sometimes, apparently, can help, can't it? Sandra, yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, Lynn, it just reminds me of this thing about being with pain or whatever, but or whether it's a pain of something that's happening in your life, not necessarily a physical pain, but is the thing of not getting into that kind of stoic frame of mind whereby, oh, it's just a bit of stuff and nonsense and I'm just going to put up with it. That kind of attitude, and put up with it. And you might have something seriously wrong with you. So, if we have a pain, it's your body saying, that there's something going on somewhere. It could be just a minor headache and nothing, and it will go. But but if it keeps coming back, I mean, obviously we're going to have to take notice of the fact that it's recurring, and there might well be something, a cause for that, which often there is, and it might need looking at. We might need to go to a health professional to go and get ourselves checked out. So I think we have to take that. I think we have to be careful with the, oh, everybody else is much worse off than I am. Thing is, we've got to look after ourselves too. But it's getting that balance, isn't it? It's like, well, if you're in an abusive relationship, I mean, you might think, oh, well, I've got a home, I still got food, and all the rest of it, but I just get smacked up every now and again. I mean, we have to be, kind of, look at these things and not just dismiss them, So anyway, I just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So, I mean, there is that in the definition of compassion, wasn't there? There is that, what can I do about it? Where was it? Definition. Those three aspects: to recognize pain or difficulty or problems, to care, in other words, we don't want it, and to care, and then can I help, or how can I help? What can I do to help? And yeah, we need to be honest, don't we? I think one of the qualities I said at the beginning we need is honesty. It does matter. Yeah, Margaret.
Yeah, my favorite word is when it comes to compassion is cherish, which when I was reading the book Being No One Going Nowhere, and I haven't actually got past the first chapter yet because it is so good and I keep reading it, and the whole thing is saying about cherishing yourself, and then you can be compassionate and help others. And since reading it, I've kind of passed that word on to, or concept on to, people who are having a hard time, and it's like a little light goes on in their heads, going, cherish, yes, I need to cherish myself. And so I really like that word, so I'm passing it on today.
Thank you. And it is a word actually that often gets a bad press in the Lam Rim teachings, doesn't it? But I think it's due to a misunderstanding. When they talk about,
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, it does. But I think it's a misunderstanding when they talk about the self-cherishing mind, and people can misunderstand it and do misunderstand it and get into that stoicism that Sandra was talking about. Because what that means is the selfish mind that is my needs are more important than everybody else's. I can only see this from my point of view. What you're talking about is something completely different. I think in the Lam Rim tradition, maybe it would be. It's not focused on that much as far as I'm aware. But it's more self-compassion, and it is that recognizing, another quote from Mathieu Ricard, nothing goes right on the outside if nothing's going right on the inside. So if we're full of self-hatred or don't care about ourselves, or putting ourselves down or whatever, and not cherishing ourselves, we are another human being, then we're not going to be able to act in a compassionate way, are we? No. So we do need to work with ourselves. I think because I don't know, my little theory is that we've got our tradition from the Tibetans, and the Tibetans basically are very confident and happy sort of people. That's their culture has gone in that direction. So certainly there's no concept in no word in the Tibetan language for guilt, for example, which can often plague us and drag us down in the West. The whole notion of self-hatred, which we're quite familiar with, I think, in the West. His Holiness, when he first came across it, apparently in a conference with Western Buddhist teachers, he just didn't understand what they meant. He had to, no, but really, what hate that? He really didn't get it. And it was only when he kind of asked the assembled room, where, has anybody here suffered from that? And most of the people put their hand up. at some point, that he got it. So again, it's another language issue, isn't it? Like, you know, the different definitions of compassion. We can give ourselves a hard time if we misunderstand if we misunderstand the language, because the words that it's been the translation has other meanings for us. So yeah, I think your self-cherishing is great. And in fact, one of the quotes from the Buddha, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I think is never not quoted enough. But he says, you can look throughout the 10 directions, throughout the entire universe, and you won't to find somebody who is more worthy of love and compassion than you are, and you won't find them. Mm. And it gives me goosebumps even to say it again. I think it's quite extraordinary. You know, equally, we can look and to try and find somebody who's less worthy of love and compassion than we are, and we won't find them. But we often don't emphasize that first one enough, in my view. Anyway, that's the way I've heard it, probably because of my own karmic disposition. But it's good to bear in mind, you know, we are equally, you know, if we're wishing for happiness for all sentient beings, we are one of those sentient beings. If we're wishing for freedom from suffering for all sentient beings, we are one of those sentient beings. So there we go. So thank you, Martha. Yeah.
Thank you.
So just thinking of how simply a 5-year-old is viewing it. And there's a line in I'm trying not to promote the fact that I've written a book about a Buddhist family, but the 5-year-old, the way her mum explained it to her is that if we are happy ourselves, it is easier to be kind to others. And that's the reason we're trying to be happy ourselves, so that we can easily be kind to others. And I just thought that's so simple and so obvious in a way, but it's beautifully simple.
Yeah. So if we keep that in our minds, then great.
And then we're not being selfish for wanting to be happy ourselves.
No.
Because we will be kind to others.
So should we go on to the meditation now, which say this wonderful teacher, Australian teacher called Glenn Svensson teaches, and it's a combination of, you'll probably be familiar with it, of loving kindness and compassion. It's a giving and taking Tonglen meditation, which he gives. So yeah, do enjoy. Takes 20 minutes. He explains it really well, I think.
Before we go on to the last two of the 4 immeasurables, empathetic joy, equanimity, I thought it'd be good to start with a meditation where we can actually combine the cultivation of loving kindness and compassion into one meditation. So let's do that now. As always, we begin by preparing the body, setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. So a vigilant posture is to keep the back nice and straight. And at the same time, allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Using the out breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allow the mind to come to rest in the present moment through focusing on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Wherever you can most easily notice any sensations associated with the breathing. So let's now engage in what's called Tonglen practice. Tonglen is a Tibetan word meaning giving and taking. And it's a very powerful method to transform our normal attachments and aversions into loving kindness and compassion. So we can begin by focusing on ourselves first, and then expanding out to include others. No matter how much mental afflictions are in our mind, so no matter how much craving and jealousy, anger, resentment, frustration, and so forth are in our mind, these are not part of the nature of our mind. They're merely like dirt covering the surface of our mind. And beneath all these mental afflictions is the natural purity of our mind. So imagine this inner purity of your mind in the form of a small, white, radiant sphere of light, in the center of your chest at the level of your heart. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if I were free of suffering and its causes. May I be free of all suffering and its causes. May I be free of all mental afflictions. And then imagine your mental afflictions and suffering in the form of black smoke filling your body. And then with each in-breath, imagine drawing that black smoke into the sphere of light at your heart, completely dissolving it there. So with each in-breath, breathe in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing your mental afflictions and suffering at your heart. Dissolving it into the inner purity of your mind, your inner wisdom. And then imagine now the black cloud is completely extinguished. And now you're completely free of all mental afflictions and suffering. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if I had happiness and its causes. May I be truly well and happy. And then with each out-breath, imagine immeasurable rays of light radiating out from the sphere of light at your heart, filling and saturating your entire body and mind. Imagining it transforming into everything you need to be happy in the short term and the long term. So with each out-breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to yourself whatever you need to be happy. And then imagine that you've now found the genuine happiness that you seek. And just as you wish to be free of suffering and find genuine happiness, so does everyone else. So now allow your field of loving kindness and compassion to expand out to the person seated next to you. They are just like yourself in wanting to be happy and wanting to be free of suffering. So arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they are free of suffering and its causes. May you be free of all suffering and its causes. And then imagine their mental afflictions and suffering in the form of black smoke filling their body. And with each in-breath, imagine drawing that black smoke out of their body and bringing it into the sphere of light at your heart, completely dissolving it there. So with each in-breath, breathe in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing their suffering at your heart. And then imagine that they're now completely free of all suffering and its causes. And take joy in this. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they had happiness and its causes. May you be truly well and happy. And then with each out-breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from your heart, filling their body and mind, and transforming into everything they need to be happy. So with each out-breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy in the short term and the long term. And then imagine that they've now found the true happiness that is their heart's desire. And rejoice in this. And then allow your field of loving kindness and compassion to expand out further. and allow your mind to move around. And whoever comes to mind, whether it's a friend, a stranger, or even someone who you find a bit difficult, bring them to mind, attend to them. May you be free of suffering and its causes. May you be truly well and happy. And then with each in-breath, breathe in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing their suffering at your heart. And with each out-breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy. And allow your mind to continue to move around. Whoever comes to mind, whether it's an individual or even a group of people, attend to them, breathing in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing their suffering at your heart, and breathing out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy. And then we can bring the meditation to a close.
Okay, so if I can just say a few things, sorry to overrun a bit, but just to round up, that struck me. One is that, compassion isn't about, we can't prevent suffering, I think. Certainly not at the moment, suffering of ourselves and others. I think it's the training is, in the meantime, is in our response to it, as I think you were saying, Jill, in the discussion, that we can respond in a more skillful way, which won't add to the problems and the suffering. And I think also that although the the Buddhist path says, you know, the end of suffering is when we get enlightened. Obviously, you know, it's not a switch, all or nothing. You know, we're suffering massively and then we're not suffering at all. As we plant these seeds and as they ripen and as we get closer, I'm sure we've all found in our Buddhist practice, then our suffering gradually reduces. We get more skill in dealing with difficulties. We have more tools to deal with difficulties. And we also have more reasons and more skills in developing, in being happy. So it is a, you know, a path to happiness, but it's a path of happiness as well, that we get, you know, greater and greater happiness along the way. And actually by acting out of compassion, again, that can help prevent overwhelm. And I just remember that, I think I said in the first session, I told the story of a close friend of mine who was dying last summer. And all the while I was focusing on what I can do to help her. I was hoping I was helpful to her, but how, you know, how I could help her to have a better life, or what remained of it, and a better death. My suffering was a lot less than I think otherwise it would have been, and hopefully, you know, it helped her as well. So, you know, that's kind of encouragement. And just one last story that I really love, which kind of sums it all up, and I think reinforces what a lot of you have said. And it's a story, you may have heard it, of the little girl walking along the beach and there's been a storm the night before, and during that storm the wind and the tides have thrown up hundreds and thousands of starfish, and then as the tide's gone out, they've been left on the beach. And so the little girl sees this as she's walking along and is moved by compassion. And so as she goes along, did I tell this story before? I can't remember. She kind of bends down, picks up a starfish, throws it into the water, bends down, picks up a starfish, throws it into the water, and so on, keeps going. And then some sensible grown-up on the beach notices what she's doing and can't hold back, and he says, you know, what are you doing? She says, I'm helping these starfish. And he said, but look at them all, there's hundreds of thousands of them, you can't make a difference. So she looked at him, she thought a bit, and then she bent down again and picked up a starfish and threw it back and looked at him again and said, made a difference to that one. And I think for me, initially, that you know, that story, I keep reminding myself, I'm going to get myself a pendant, I think, with a starfish on it, just to remind myself that this is what we can do. But then recently I came across an extension of that story, which I remembered I'd kind of forgotten along the way. And she goes along and she still carries on picking up the starfish as she goes along. And then other people on the beach see what she's doing and start to join her. And so they all, you know, they're all going along the beach. And then the very helpful grown-up who told her not to be so silly kind of sees, you know, what fun they're having, and actually they are making a bit of a difference. So he kind of thinks, well, why can't I join in as well? So he joins in. So I don't know if they saved all the starfish on the beach, possibly not, but it kind of, that story sticks with me, and I now know from that ending of the story, I know the little girl's name as well, so it has to be Greta, doesn't it, really? So that's all from me. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Jill, for your technical wizardry. And thanks everyone for coming and for joining in so gratefully. Thank you, I'm grateful.
Thank you, Lynn. That was really beautiful, and I'm so glad you ended with that story, because I absolutely love that story. And just very quickly, that I was working with a primary school, and the teacher did the most amazing work with her class around that story, and I'll never forget it. It must be 25 years ago, but it was such good work. Beautiful RE work with the children, and they loved it, and that story's always stayed with me because those children got so much out of it. So it is about making a difference to the one.
Yeah, and we can all do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn. You've inspired us again, I'm sure, and we're very grateful for your.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lynne.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really good. And it was nice to hear Glenn Svenson's voice again
Yeah.
after a few years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
A good meditation, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you.
Sense it well. Thank you.
And your next teaching is on the 13th of June. Just
Yeah. Joy. Hooray. Yeah.
date in their diary and spread the word as well, and let others know. We'll see you then. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming as well, for spending the time with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.